thank you all for coming and welcome. This is the first in a number of events that I think we'll be having in the coming months and years to start thinking about or helping you guys think about transitions from school to work. Obviously, we're living in a kind of tough economy, but I think even beyond the sort of current times, the world has really changed in terms of how people think about crafting careers and sort of making their way through a career. And I think we're really no longer in a sort of situation in which the likely scenario is that you can walk out of here with a UCLA degree and enter a training program with a big company or go to law school and sign on with a firm, and then sort of have probably what happens to you in your career really just sort of follow along a path with that one firm. And so I think it's never too early to start thinking about what's next. And so today I think we're going to think help you guys think a little bit about that, share some experiences with some incredible folks that who have come out of UCLA political science and have come back to be with us today, and I'm so pleased that they're here. I'm going to do a sort of informal sort of back and forth here, and I'll ask some questions, and hopefully you all have lots of good questions. And then when we're finished, there's going to be a little reception outside. So if you want to sort of follow up or ask some more questions or something, we'll all be available just outside after the presentation. Before we get started, I just want to say a few thank yous. First to Peter Evans in the Development External Relations Office, who helped to get everybody here today, and also to Cynthia Sherrill and Sue Pfeiffer, Belinda Sunu, and Bonnie Chen, who are staffers in political science, who really did a great job of getting this event organized and putting us all up on this stage here today. So I'm very thankful for them for doing that. As I said, the idea here is to bring back some people who were once where you are today and kind of track their path to where they are. So I guess I'll sort of begin by introducing each of these folks. So immediately to my left here is Pat Laughlin. Pat is a partner in the New York firm of K&L Gates. He is a civil and criminal litigator. Litigators make me a little bit nervous, but I think we'll be okay. Previously an assistant U.S. attorney, and has charted a path from UCLA to the East Coast and made a career there. On his left is Suzanne Moline. Suzanne is general counsel in a firm whose name I've written down.
It's an investment management.
Investment management firm.
Hedge funds.
I'm sorry, hedge fund. Yes. In Francis Capital Management. Previously a lawyer at the firm of Jones, Day and Rivas, doing bankruptcy law, and prior to that a clerk in the U.S. District Court and the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. Mm-hmm. And let's see, to her left is Amy Finley. Amy is also a political science major here at UCLA, but has gone on to a less, I would say, traditional career for a political science major, perhaps. Amy is maybe known to some of you who follow the Food Network for winning America's Top Chef, for having her own show on the Food Network. She's also now an author of cookbooks and other sort of cook and lifestyle travel type publications. Prior to that, she was a pastry chef, and prior to that worked in publishing. And actually, we were just saying before, had at the very first job after college, she was a science and technology analyst, which was actually the same thing I did right after college. So I think that does tell you that at some point paths can diverge. And on her left is Tom Mabie. Tom is a graduate of UCLA Political Science and also UCLA Law School. He now has his own firm specializing in employment and recycling law. He was previously a partner at the firm of Morgan, Lewis, and Bacchius doing corporate litigation. So it's a lot of litigators, really.
Employment recycling, how you recycle employees?
No, they're two different fields.
And I would also just like to say a thank you to Tom. Tom has really continued his connection to UCLA over the years, and is, I think, currently serving as the chair of the UCLA Fund, has been on the board of directors of the UCLA Foundation, and of the board of directors of UCLA Professionals. And so just thanks, Tom, for all that you've done over the years for UCLA. And then to Tom's left is the last of our panelists, Denise Spatafora. Denise is an executive leadership and life coach. She's a motivational speaker and author, and she has an amazing list of clients working with major corporations such as Google, Dove, Chanel, and Credit Suisse. And also, I think we should definitely be sure to talk about the leadership counseling and coaching that you did for the Onion. For those of you who know what the Onion is, a satirical news magazine. So I don't know what you might have done for them, but I'll be interested to find out. So that is our amazing panel, and I thought we could just start by having everybody say maybe just a little bit more about themselves. And maybe I didn't say who I was. I'm for those of you, you guys all know who I am. I'm Jeff Lewis. I'm the chair of the Political Science Department. Okay, so let's start with you, Pat. You just want to say a little bit about yourself and.
Sure. I mean, it's a little, it's a somewhat self-conscious thing, sort of standing up here and telling people you're the nutshell version of your biography. But I came to UCLA in 1968 when dinosaurs roamed the earth, from your perspective probably. I came here for two reasons. My parents had 7 children, and my father would have bankrupted himself but for the fact that UCLA was the best bargain in higher education. And I was a water polo player, and UCLA had the best water polo team. I became a political science major and focused on political theory because I had a roommate who said that the best teachers in the department taught political theory. And after law school, I went to Yale, and I actually had some residual interest in being a political scientist. I got a master's degree in political science there, but the path for me was pretty clearly law. And what I would say, actually, from my perspective is, there is no grand plan when you're 19 or 20 years old about what you'll be doing when you're, I blush to disclose, in your 60s. But my experience has been that if you do a lot of different things, that is life enriching. And after I got my law degree, I've done a lot of different things. I've been a prosecutor. I've been a law professor. I ran a small criminal justice policy foundation in London for a few years, and I've been in the private practice of law for now about 20 years. And the other thing I guess I would say from my perspective is the nature of at least my profession has changed dramatically in my lifetime. When I went to law school, which was in the 1970s, most law firms were small. Now professional services in the legal context is provided by huge firms. My firm is the 9th largest law firm in the country, and although my practice is primarily representing corporations and people who are entangled in government investigations because that's a sort of prosecutorial skill set, in the last 5 years my work, which most people would think is domestic and even local, has taken me to China 3 times, India, Australia, Russia, Japan, Brazil, Switzerland. So I always say to my own children, who are basically your age and a little older, the world is a global platform for all of us. And if I was your age again, I probably would not scurry into law school right away after graduating from UCLA. I'd try to find a way to live and work in another part of the world, especially the 2 countries that I think will be most important in your lifetimes, China and India.
Thanks. Pat. Suzanne?
I'm Suzanne Moline. I graduated from UCLA in 1989, which was 2 years after the stock market crashed. And when I graduated, things were pretty grim. And they were still grim when I graduated from law school in 1993. So I remember graduating from undergrad and really feeling unprepared for what was out there, and really having sort of no clue how to go from that chair to actually getting a paycheck. So, so law school is very attractive to me because that gave me 3 years to basically sort of sit out the bad economy and try and sort of come up with some collective thoughts about what I wanted to do. I never had a grand plan. I will say though, when I was your age, I definitely thought ahead and kind of thought backwards. So the thing I thought a lot about was money and economics. So I grew up in a family where I grew up in a very affluent community, and I looked at my friends and my their parents, and I thought, you know what, I want to be like that when I grow up. I want to live in the house, and so I did sort of look ahead and say, when I'm in my 40s or 50s, like, what lifestyle do I want to live? And in thinking about that lifestyle, I did work backwards into choosing which doors you're going to go through, because door A, door B, and door C for me could lead to sort of different economic outputs later down the road. And I really like law school. I really love being a lawyer. I worked for at the time it was the second biggest law firm in the country. However, while I was working as a lawyer, I found myself probably more interested. I did bankrupt companies that were going down the tubes, which is a growing business back then. I found myself much more fascinated by the business and what went wrong with the business, what was going to change it, why on earth are they going through bankruptcy, what's bankruptcy going to do for them, and what's the end result. And so I actually ended up switching from working as a lawyer to working as an investment banker. That meant that I had to come back to UCLA, and I took all those math and accounting classes that I did not take when I was your age because I had serious math phobia.
Oh, God.
If I had one piece of advice for you guys, I think every human being that graduates from UCLA should take accounting 1A and 1B and maybe a macroeconomics class. Because no matter what you do, if you own your own business, if you work as a lawyer, understanding a balance sheet and income statement, a cash flow statement, you need that for your life as a person, and you also need that for whatever business you work in. So that's those classes are no fun, but they're highly valuable. And so over time, my job's really been a hybrid of finance and law, and they are intertwined. And how the poli-sci works into it is, we were just talking about how, the human factors that go into what your job is. And I think what I learned here was really looking at living issues and being able to think about both sides of them. Putting yourself in somebody else's shoes when you buy a stock or whatever. You have to figure out why the person's selling the stock, like what are they thinking about? If you're long and they're short, you have to really put yourself in both shoes and kind of do the analysis from both points of view, just like you sat here and did at UCLA. And I think you guys will ask questions later, but that's my starting point.
That's a good starting point.
Thanks, Suzanne. Amy?
I should have taken economics classes while I was at UCLA. So I'm Amy. I graduated in '95. So it's interesting also to hear how, things were changing so quickly and stuff from the 80s to the 90s. I graduated right smack into the middle of the dot-com boom. So most of my friends, I remember actually being so paralyzed at graduation, being like, wait, whoa, everybody seems to have got this figured out. People have got Anderson Consulting jobs lined up. People got their law school applications already. People have people have got internships happening in DC. And I had no plan whatsoever. Although actually what was fantastic is while I was an undergrad, I was very involved on campus. I was a Bruin Woods counselor. I was an alumni ambassador. I was on the homecoming court when I was a senior, which was really fun. I got to ride in the parade. But like I say, I actually look at sort of how I was at UCLA, and I look at my life now as a 38-year-old, and I actually realize in so many ways I still feel like I'm kind of living the same life now as I was living then, which actually probably speaks to the fact that you always are who you are. It'd be really nice if you could, change your personality dramatically in order to make it more compatible with the things that you should be doing at any given moment in life. But you can eventually become sort of a little more selective and wiser, and maybe a little less, not necessarily spontaneous, or maybe a little less compulsive or whatever. But you always are, who you are, and I actually have no regrets about the path that I took out of UCLA, other than just to say that it's definitely been kind of a meandering one like this, from working on campus immediately after graduation as a science and technology policy analyst, which brought me eventually back down to my hometown of San Diego, where I did the same sort of thing for UCSD and for the, say it with me, the National Partnership for Advanced Computational Infrastructure, where I wrote highly stimulating pieces on all kinds of science about which I'm still slightly flummoxed. But then those things, everything start to gather momentum. So, doing that helped me eventually, when I found myself living in Sun Valley, Idaho, talk my way into a job as a editor for a food and wine magazine, which helped reconnect me back to something that I had always loved, but had never really considered as something that was a viable option for a career, which was to go more deeply into food, which then took me to Paris, which took me to culinary school, which also is how I met my husband, and then which has kind of brought me all the way to where I am now, which is a writer and a food person. So I've done, if any of you are fans of Chopped, I will be on Chopped in September. And, still throwing balls up in the air and kind of seeing where they're going to come down. Although I was saying that I think that the way that I know that I am applying my political science major and sort of all of that thought training that I think you get from your major, I apply it all the time. When you think of, I think of some of probably my class that I remember the best, poli-sci, and I was in American government concentration, I think, was on politics and interest groups. And let me tell you, I use politics and interest groups every day, every minute, in order to continue to sort of build my own career, because it's constantly about trying to figure out who are the interest groups? What are people, people are organizing themselves based upon shared interest in this. How do you penetrate that group? How do you get into it? And you guys have all of these different tools for doing that sort of research and understanding that we didn't have when we were undergrads or graduating from UCLA. You've got smartphone technology and Facebook and Twitter and all of these ways that give you so much access. So I think actually what I'm excited for all of you for is now you've got this fantastic training about how to understand groups, how to understand how groups come together in order, based upon self-identification of common needs and things, and how you've got access to all of them practically at your fingertips. So I would imagine it's going to be an extremely exciting time for all of you to be graduating out into the world. And so there you go.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
I'm Tom Mabie, graduated in '76 with a poli-sci degree and then from the law school in '79. I have my entire career been in private practice, working for one firm or another, and most of my firms eventually merged into the mega firm where I was a partner for many years. And we have the second largest firm somebody was a member of, the ninth, and mine was, at the time I left it, was the seventh largest firm in the country, and I'm sure it's still in about that range right now. But for the last 15 years I've had my own office open, and so I've put up with myself longer than anybody else has. I took an American law class when I was a senior in high school. I debated in high school and in college, and I enjoyed that. And so between the law class and the debate, I found a way to wed my interest in arguing with something that would put food on my table on a regular basis. So by the time I got to college, I was very sure that I wanted to go to law school. Now, I will tell you, I had no idea what being a lawyer was other than watching Perry Mason or the other TV shows. I just thought it was going into court and arguing cases. And you find out first in law school and then in actual practice that it bears some but not complete resemblance to the picture that you see either in the movies or in books or television. And fortunately for me, it ended up being something that I've enjoyed doing. So that's what I've been doing for quite some time now. I started as an American government emphasis in poli-sci, but I was seduced by foreign policy theory and had most of my upper division courses in the poli-sci department in foreign policy theory. But it's good to have, if you're going to go into law, have some good foundation in American government structure. It's used all the time.
this one. Denise?
I think, first of all, I just wanted to know in the audience, like juniors, seniors, so how many of you are juniors? Okay, and seniors? Okay, sophomores, freshmen?
Yeah, we can tell who's interested
All
in
right,
the job
got
right
it.
now.
Okay, good. Okay, the reason I ask is because, well, first of all, when I graduated, a week later, I ended up in New York City. And I didn't end up there, I interviewed, that's a whole wild story, but, and that was my first job. And so I've been in New York and built all my businesses in New York for the last 20 plus years. And I just returned back to Los Angeles in the last year. So this whole thing's very surrealistic. But what I was going to tell you was in the last year, I've attended various events at UCLA, and I also began teaching a course that I designed for juniors and seniors and also for the Anderson School around entrepreneurship, but specifically for juniors and seniors. I've taught a few of the excerpts of that course, and it's called Passion, Purpose, and Peace. And basically it's an experiential and practical course in life skills. So I've just had the fortune of being able to do that over the last few months, and I thought I would tell you this interesting story because it may relate to where you all are. How many of you have attended Interview with a Bruin? Anybody? Okay. That many, huh? Okay. I don't even remember Interview with a Bruin. There was none of that when I was graduating. But so Interview with a Bruin, for those of you who don't know it, it's about 500 alumni come back, and we get to mentor any of the undergrads who with their resumes, and they sit down with you. It's like speed dating, except around your life, right? And you come and you sit down and you get to be mentored by an alumni person. So I'm back in LA, and I said, let me do that event. And we meet the alumni just like we are right now, and we're at dinner. And I go to my table, huge room. I don't even remember where it is now on campus. And the first girl comes up to me, and she's a senior, adorable, totally adorable, walks up to the table, sits down, and is completely tense. She's like this, and she gently pushes her resume in front of me, and she goes, "Hi." And I'm like, "Hi." She goes, "I just want a job." And I was like, "Okay, all right, I got it. You just want a job. I hear you." So I said, "Here's what we have to do. First of all, let's put the resume off to the left, unbutton your jacket, because you're making me nervous. And just take a deep breath, because I don't know what you think we're going to end up talking about. But just kind of follow my lead, okay?" And she's looking around okay, holding on to the resume. I'm like, "No, really, let the resume go," right? So we begin this conversation, which is part of what I teach and what I do. And so I started having this conversation. I'm like, "Just tell me who you are." And she looked at me like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, just tell me about your background, tell me about your parents, tell me what you like, tell me who you are." And so she said, "Okay, so my parents are from the Philippines. They moved here. They were immigrants. They became doctors. They're in business together. They've made a huge difference for a ton of people." And she just keeps talking. And I'm like, "Wow, that's amazing." She goes, "I want to make that kind of difference. I'm interested in medicine. I hate blood." I'm like, "I hear you." So, she starts to tell me all this, none of which is anywhere on the resume, nowhere to be found. Then I kind of glance over, and the last line in the resume, it says black belt. And I said, "Are you a black belt?" And she goes, "Yeah." Like I just said, "Do you want a cup of coffee?" She's like, "Yeah, so," I'm like, "Listen, tell me about the world of being a black belt." And she's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Listen, I have 2 children. I have an 11-year-old daughter, Savannah, a 9-year-old son, Orion, and they study with a Taekwondo master who is amazing. He is fierce and joyful at the same time, and it is the best combination, but it is an intense discipline, and there is so much that you learn. So tell me about the world of being a black belt." So she tells me about this whole journey of being a black belt, the focus, reading someone else's energy. When do you do that? When do you not? Of course, all of which is nowhere expressed on the resume. Mm-hmm. So I said, "This is extraordinary. You have an extraordinary background." And I said, "Do you talk about this in your conversations when you're talking about yourself and exploring these next places that you want to go in your life?" And she's like, "No." And basically, sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but it was so sweet. She's like, "I've been in a really dark place." And then she starts to cry. And then everyone starts staring at me. I'm like, "It's okay. She's fine." So
This is helpful.
You're the meanest interviewer
I
ever.
know, right? But the reality was I get it, because who was having that conversation with any of us? Certainly no one was having that with me. I was having to figure it out at that point. Make a long story short, the bottom line was she really began to get who she was. in the conversation. She got what her natural born gifts were. She got how to begin piecing together her experiences and sharing them openly. I put her on a path to start doing research to see what places she could go investigate that would be a match for what she was really up to. How do you language who you are and talk about it and let go of a result and worry about some interview process that you have to look a certain way, be a certain way, talk a certain way? You know, forget it. You're screwed if you try and follow those kind of rules. So anyway, that's kind of how I got back to UCLA. And now I'm with you. So I hope this conversation, I would encourage you, and I really mean this, that to use this conversation, and I know that was your intention, to whatever you need for yourself right now in your life, to use this conversation and get and ask whatever you need to for yourself so you can walk away with some value out of this conversation today and not care how it sounds or looks. So I just encourage you that as we're here today.
Thanks, Denise, and welcome back to California, to
Oh, it's
UCLA.
nice. It's fun.
And Denise won't make all of you cry.
Unless you want her to. I kind of want
Not
to
at the same time. I thought maybe we'd just pick up on something that Pat mentioned, which was the idea that maybe there's something sort of unexpected that might be a good thing to do when you leave college, like maybe even if you think you want to be a lawyer or go earn an MBA or something, to maybe go live overseas was, I think, what you suggested. I wonder if maybe each of you might say a little bit about what you think might be a great thing for somebody to do after college that might be a little bit less expected, and also for those of you that maybe are lawyers, I think the experience that Tom suggested is a pretty common one, where people think they sort of want to go to law school and they think they want to be a lawyer, but they don't really know what the law is about. So is there maybe something that we could advise people that they could do for a year or 2 years to get a sense of what the law is before they make the plunge into law school? So I guess more just, that's not really a question in there exactly, but maybe to tie it all together, just think about if you were counseling somebody who's in the position of these guys about what they might do next that they might not have thought about, what would that be?
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily encourage people at this point to jump into law school, in part because, unfortunately, the marketplace for legal jobs is contracting. And in fact, I think law school applications are going down in the last few years because of the perception that what occurred when I think many of us were in law school, which was it was somewhat of a sort of up escalator, and I don't think that's quite such a sure bet. What I encourage, and this is consistent with what I was saying before, I encourage people who, and again I think of my own children, if you think that you want to sort of wait a bit before plunging into either law school or something else that is a sort of direct path to the beginning of a career in the workplace, go off and have an adventure. I mean, one of my sons is going to France next year to teach English to kids in France, and he's he just finished his junior year in college, and I think that's a terrific thing. People who may be interested in the law sometimes and get a sense of it by, if they're not ready to go to law school, by going to a law firm and working as essentially what is called a paralegal or a legal assistant. And you get a pretty good picture of what life at a big law firm is in that role. And that's a pretty good way of getting a sense of whether it's your cup of tea or not. So those are two ideas. One, go out and have an adventure before you dive into the life of work. But if you want to get a sense of what law practice is like, you might consider working in a law firm in a sort of paralegal role. Those jobs are still available, more available than sort of young lawyer associate jobs at big firms.
I would say one advantage that you have by going to UCLA, which if you haven't taken advantage of it, you're in the middle of Westwood. So if you're going to Dartmouth and Hanover, New Hampshire, there's like no job you're going to get there that's, other than working at the movie theater. You live in the middle of Los Angeles. So it's an opportunity to work in some business that you think you might be interested in and just sort of see how it all works. I got a job. I was interested. I sort of had this idea about being a lawyer. So I did go get a job, I think my junior year, working for, just a solo practitioner out here on Wilshire Boulevard. He was a criminal lawyer. It was highly interesting. I figured out in about maybe 3 days that I had no interest in criminal law. It just wasn't my thing. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't had that job. So if you can get a job working at some business, that is a great opportunity to test the waters. In terms of, like, you talked about sort of changing your path from what you think you wanted to do. I was really fascinated by international relations, but I also found Washington, D.C. to be highly entertaining. So I did my junior summer, I worked in Washington, D.C. for the summer, lived at Georgetown. It was during the Reagan 80s. The Republicans, lots of special interest money, lots of great parties. I found it super, super fun. And I thought, oh, well, this is what I want to do when I graduate from college, because it looks like a fun adventure, living in another part of the country, just lots of excitement. So when I graduated from college, I thought, okay, well, I'll think about going to law school. I'll go do that DC thing for a year. And this is really hard because sometimes you have an idea about something you want to do and it turns out you're wrong. And the hardest thing you can do sometimes is to admit to yourself that you were wrong and what you're doing isn't the right thing for you. So I went to DC. Here's what I figured out. I figured out that, number one, if you get a job, it is so hard to get a job. It relies so much on personal connections. Being from California, I grew up in California. There's this whole East Coast thing that I didn't understand. There's a lot of personal interconnections that people have that at the time Californians weren't part of. So this whole subtext conversation, what boarding school did you go to? Oh, I knew your best friend from camp. Who's your daddy? Who's your mom? A lot of connections with your parents. And for me, who had no connected parents, you're left out of that conversation. Well, my dad's an engineer at Boeing. Nobody cares about that. And so I could see that I could get that job, and I worked so hard I was able to finally get a job offer based on my connections from the summer before, and I learned that it paid $14,000 a year, okay? Why I hadn't figured this out before I went to DC, I don't know, but I just didn't even know. My parents had no idea either. So I figured out really quickly that all these people that were working these jobs were either A, going into credit card debt, or B, they had somebody bankrolling them, and I did not have that. So my choice was come back home, live at home, which at the time nobody did, and admit that this was a mistake, or kind of stick it out. And so I remember sitting there going, is this the right thing to do? And so I felt like I came back to LA with my tail behind my legs. But for me to have stuck it out, that would have been a mistake for me. And I ended up then applying for law school. And we could have a whole separate sub-panel on how to do law school, because I actually, I really enjoyed my career as a lawyer. I liked it. That could be a whole separate topic. And I'm a bit of a contrarian. That's how you make money being investing, by the way. You got to do something slightly different than everybody else. I would actually say that when everybody hates being a lawyer and when law school applications are going down, that's when you start thinking about, okay, well, let me see how it goes and then see what happens. But the bottom line is you got to go to law school because you want to be a lawyer. It's way too much work if you don't think you want the job. I mean, it's wonderful. You maybe get a job at a big law firm, pay your student loan back, but it's too much work to do. You have to have an interest in actually being a lawyer. But if you want to do it, things change. Things are cyclical. You learn that in poli-sci. So don't give up that idea just because things are actually quite bad for lawyers right now.
But maybe Suzanne will give you some stock tips during the Q&A thing.
I can talk about how poli-sci relates to stock picking all day long, by the way, which is, investment management's a great career, so we could talk about that.
We should do that another night. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I want to hear that too. All right, so what would I say? Best thing to do after graduate. Well, for as bad as things are right now, I am still actually of the conviction that getting a job, ultimately, when you look back on it, is easy, and getting a life is hard, because life is everything else, and I think that coming out of UCLA, I'd paid my way through school, I had a ton of student loan debt, And I was, that was my first and foremost focus for a very long time, was about just how was I going to get a paycheck. I mean, I was that girl sitting on the other side of the resume being like, I just need a job. I'm an adult, I think, now, and I've got responsibilities. I have my first car. I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. And all of those things. And it was so, consequently, I kind of went into, I actually took the very first job that was offered to me, which was to do government relations for an HMO. And I lasted approximately 3 months. And for 2 months and probably 3 weeks and 3 days of that, I was in absolute and complete agony. But it seemed like everything was right. I had the right suit and stuff on that I was supposed to have, and I had a parking pass to be able to go and park in the parking lot. And I had a salary, an annual salary that, compared to some of the people I knew who had just graduated, also was looking pretty good. And it was just horrible. It was absolutely, like, I thought my soul was dying every single day. I remember getting into the elevator, and this was up in the valley. I stayed in Westwood, and I lived in an apartment on Gailey. I got a friend's studio apartment. I sublet it for the summer. And I remember just looking around and being like, what has happened to my life? Nothing makes sense anymore. I'd look longingly out the window at people walking around Westwood and being like, I don't fit in there anymore. And I didn't know where I fit in anymore. I mean, that transition from this secure kind of bubble of being on campus to then being a part of the world it's big. It's a very, very large transition. So actually, I guess maybe then part of my advice kind of builds on go and have an adventure, which is maybe don't take it on so quickly. If you can find a way, and then I guess that's my other little bit of advice is I actually really think there's always a way. When it comes to figuring out how are you going to pay for things, don't get married yet to the idea that you have to figure it out, the big paycheck, annual salary, this is going to be my career path, and I'm setting my first foot on it, the minute I walk out of Poly Pavilion with my diploma. It might take you a very long time to actually get to where that particular path is. And in between now and then, there are, even in this economy, there are a lot of people who are willing to pay you something to do something that you're interested in. So, so that would be, for me, I was relating to these guys before that I actually, the first thing or a meal that I ever sat down and deliberately thought about and then said, this is exactly for how it's going to feel when I finish my last final, which was an art history final. And I knew that when I finished that art history final, how I was going to feel, thinking about, this will be it, that'll be the end, that'll be the beginning of the rest of my life, and I wanted to have this perfect lunch, which should have been my first clue, right? The first thing I think about is what do I want to eat? And so, I was and I went to Breadsticks, which at the time was the only place to buy groceries in Westwood. And I had no cars, hauling things back and forth all the way up and down Gailey with it. And I planned out this meal that I had chicken breasts, and I was going to braise them in, actually, I used bottled Italian dressings. I didn't really know how to cook very well back then. And baguettes. I was going to slice baguettes and put them on baguettes with sliced Roma tomatoes and mozzarella. And, I'll wrap them up in foil so that they'll actually get, the juices will permeate into the baguette. And I picked out the most perfect, gorgeous peaches, and I bought a bottle of champagne to illegally drink on campus. And I packed all of that in my backpack with me and went and took my last final. And came out and then sat by the fountain. And it's like, what actually is right there, I don't think that I caught the significance of that moment until 10 years later. When it was, what's the first thing I wanted to do as soon as I was done with school? I wanted to eat, But so if you can find a way to take a breath and a pause and see what sort of comes up to the surface, you might be really surprised at what those things are. But some of those things, but they knit back together eventually. Like I do a lot of cooking on a farm in National City in San Diego, which is a underprivileged community close to the border. That has the highest rate of childhood obesity in all of San Diego County, one of the highest rates in the nation. And I'm cooking there, and I teach the kids, we bring them into the kitchen. They do garden education and where they're enhancing their science literacy. And then they come into the kitchen where we've got all this fantastic farm fresh produce that they've just sometimes helped plant or helped harvest. And they come in, and then we cook those things with them, from scratch to sort of, talk about healthy eating in kind of a non-confrontational, easy way. And I'm still, it's social justice. It's all of those things that, for me were the most important about what I was getting out of poli-sci here, the things that I loved about it. They, like I said, you really can't probably get much beyond who you are because you just are who you are. But when you don't get too fixated about figuring out the right path, and instead you just go and let yourself have a little breather and see what starts to happen, and maybe start looking for those seemingly insignificant throwaway moments that later on you're going to look back and be like, that was the first clue I was ever given about what I really wanted to make of my life. And then that's sort of how you get on the path of not just getting a job, but of getting a life.
This is all really good advice. I love it.
There's sort of an implicit assumption that a great majority of you are planning on a legal career. Is there any truth in that? How many are thinking about going to law school? Okay, never mind.
I know my audience.
Okay. I'm going to be a little bit contrarian. I think there is value in going straight through. I don't think all of us have the option economically of taking a year off. Sometimes, if you're fortunate enough to have your parents helping you through undergrad, that often cuts off when you get the BA, and now you're on your own, and it's time to start applying for loans. But your study muscle is at its peak when you graduate from college, and you take a year off and do something else, and unless it's academic, I will tell you, and then the other side of that is I had students in my law school sections that were second career people, and they didn't think that 3 hours a day of lectures was a hard day since they'd work 12 hours a day. So there is the contrary of that. But if you're only going to be out a year or two, I just have a contrary view. Now, some of you, when I was taking poli-sci, I also thought about going into politics, or thought that law was a way station before I went into either a government or political career. If you're at all interested in that and you want a breather after school, join the Peace Corps, join Vista. Do something that looks great on your resume. Nobody's expecting you to make any money, and yet you will make connections that will be lifelong connections that are very, very valuable, and you'll learn life skills that you won't learn anyplace else. I mean, join the military. I'm serious. These are all things that if you're going to be going into government or politics are very, very valuable. I want to also pick up on what Amy was saying. Don't be thinking about the money right now. If you're going to law school because you want to make money, you're not going to be happy, okay? You need to be going to law school because you like the practice of law. And I want to encourage you, if you have any doubts in your mind whether law is the right thing for you or if this is the right time, is there something else in your life that you're passionate about? When I was your age, I had just learned about drinking wine and realized that at some point after I was 21 that it was going to be something that I would probably carry on. As I've gotten older, I've enjoyed as a hobby learning to cook for myself and my family, and really enjoy that. And so something in the food industry would have an appeal. But I have friends who are very much into different types of media, whether it's entertainment or sports, or whether it's journalism or books. I think if you follow what you are passionate about and even start at an absolute entry level with your wonderful UCLA BA degree, 10 years from now, the money's, you're all brilliant. You're bright people. You wouldn't be here. 10 years from now, the money takes care of itself because you'll be so good at what you're doing. And the reason you'll be so good is because you get up every morning and it's not a job, it's something you really love doing. So that's what you need to focus on. Now, for a lot of you, that will be, or hopefully will be, the law. And but not for all of you. And don't be surprised if 5 or 10 years from now you find something else that you're absolutely passionate about and think, you know what, I'm tired of doing this with my life. I want to go follow something else, and try and have the space in your life where you can do something like that. The other little issue about taking a couple years off and maybe going and working and making money for a couple of years, it's hard to give that up and go back to school again. You really get spoiled by having a nice apartment and eating something other than pasta 5 times a week.
I have great recipes for pasta. Go
Yeah.
Well, let's
Some
see.
people just eat ramen.
Yeah. It's so subjective. I mean, it really is a subjective conversation because it's so personalized to who you are and what you're up to. I have a deep respect for the law. I love my lawyer because I work on a lot of business deals. I need my lawyer. It's part of my team. However, I've coached a lot of lawyers, and they have gone on to build businesses outside of the law because they were miserable in the law. So it's so subjective. I would say I'll move on to what I really wanted to say, but I would say about the law, for those of you who are serious about it, because I thought I was going to be a lawyer as well, and I used my verbal skills and my wanting to make a difference and my wanting to have things be fair in a different way. But what I would say for those of you who are thinking about the law, I would literally pick a handful of people that either you know or that are friends of friends and be willing to have conversations and say, what is it really like in the trenches? What is it like when you're doing the research? How much research are you doing? What is litigating like? What is that life really like as an interview? So that would be just one thing I would say just off the top, of my head. But in terms of the point I was really trying to make is I've literally coached hundreds of people. I've had the privilege of coaching, the heads of Google, the heads of the Wall Street Journal. I really have done it for a very long time, and I love the entrepreneurs because I'm an entrepreneur. And what I can tell you is, if I was to give you advice about where you are right now, the major thing I would say is be very careful, and I know it's going to be funny, of what you really listen to and believe. And what I mean by that is you could hear all these comments and in life, watch out, the economy, oh my God, it's going to suck, you're never going to get a job, you better just grab anything you can. Or, all these cultural conversations, some of which have truth to them. I'm not saying that you can't listen to them and understand them and, learn the economy and get what's going on. However, if you get sucked into that particular conversation, you will then lose sight about what you actually do want to create. If I look at my path and all the businesses that I designed, if I listened to anyone, I would never have done it, ever. And I truly mean that. I'm sure you have with all of you and all the ventures that you've ever gone on. So I would just be very aware of that. So I would say it doesn't even matter, get a job, not get a job, travel, whatever it is. But I think that the basis of that is what is really right for you, and be willing to risk and have the courage to just try, right? And I think that is the fundamental thing, is that if I look at all the people I've ever worked with in business, it was the willingness to actually trust themselves. And I think that gets developed over time. So I know that kind of sounds ethereal. I mean, I actually teach how to trust oneself, but we can talk about that outside over wine, which is always lovely. But the point is that, to actually get into trusting yourself and really feeling what that feels like and be willing to do that, So I'll just give you a very simple example. I was interviewing on campus here, and I remember I was interviewing with Eastman Kodak, and the job I was interviewing for was international marketing. And it was a really cool job, and I thought, okay, just exactly like you said, I need the money. My parents were born and raised in Italy. I'm from an immigrant family. I'm not a trust fund baby. I need a paycheck at that time. And we're in the interview, and I'm asking questions, they're asking questions, and they said, you'd be great, and we want to be able to send you anywhere in the United States. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, if we give you the offer, we can send you anywhere. So I said, you mean I have no say in it? And they said, yeah, we can send you anywhere. And I said, that probably won't work for me. And he looked at me and he goes, what do you mean? And I said, I'm being very truthful for you. I don't know if I can live anywhere. I mean, me in North Carolina, God bless them, but I really don't, nothing personal to the South, but, I just don't see myself there. Maybe LA, maybe New York. He's like, would you go to New York? I'm like, I absolutely would. And they said, well, we would consider sending you to New York. Anyway, they did send me to New York, and that's what the offer was based around, but I wasn't allowed to tell anyone that was hired with me. My point is that to trust myself enough to be able to say it really wouldn't work for me to live anywhere else is a matter of where you start to test your voice and your courage. So I don't know what that looks like for you, but you may want to look for yourself, like where would you play with that level of testing it out. So
If you don't ask, they can't give it to you.
Thanks. This is really totally interesting sort of set of views and different perspectives. I really sat and thought a lot about the advice that I've given people, and it's so much along the lines of what Tom was describing, that tension between well, if you go out for a year and you've had a really and you've been working 70 hours a week for a guy you didn't like on a thing you didn't necessarily care that much about, then when you go back to school, this is great, because now I'm working on 70 hours a week on something that I like. And yet at the same time, there is that allure of the next little bump or raise that you get, and it gets harder and harder, I think, to go back. So particularly for those of you considering not a professional school, but to go back for academic training and so forth, that tension is a real one to consider. But at the same time, I think, if you could spend a year doing Teach for America or Peace Corps or just even working in DC, and I would say I did that too, and I had the exact same experience. In fact, I really did great when I got down there, because I got a job that was a lot better than yours. It paid $17,500, and I could.
Right. I mean, you can't live off
You
that.
joined the Wolf Network. You can
Well, I
actually
did
go
actually, and
work
I'll
on
tell you how I did.
it.
I lived in a neighborhood where the third time we got robbed, when the police came,
I went to a
instead of
neighborhood
asking
that-
about the
right.
suspect, they asked me why I lived there.
Yeah. I went to that neighborhood looking for an apartment that I could afford. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how you have to do it. On the other hand, there is, in a certain sense, if you can swing it, there's almost no better place, in my opinion, in the world to be like 23, 24 years old. They give you a ridiculous amount of responsibility. It's crazy what you get to decide. You get to be really in the mix. There's really good softball almost every night of the summer, and you can eat the Tyson chicken wings and the Wisconsin Dairy Board ice cream for free every night at the
If you eat
Capitol.
Tyson chicken, I will come and hunt you down.
Yes.
Okay, so that wouldn't be the best thing to do.
Okay.
Okay, so let's become maybe turn the conversation in a sort of more tactical or practical direction. I have a few questions here from our political science students organization, and I actually was sort of maybe remiss in not just recognizing Laura Watson and Antonio Mestria and Mackenzie Menya in their role in putting this together. They do such a great job for us, and I'm sure a lot of you were involved in the PSSO when you guys were students here. And their questions, which they provided me, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for theirs, are all of a sort of more tactical. And they just sort of want to know, what do I do? What's the first step that I take? Like, I've identified maybe, like Suzanne was saying, I had an idea of the kind of job I'd like to have, and there was a person who did that kind of job in Westwood, and it was criminal law, and I turned out I was wrong, but that's what but I was able to get that position. So, how do you get your resume, do you think, in the right hands? What are the most sort of important pieces or important advice that you can impart in terms of, once you've kind of got an objective, how do you obtain that objective?
Gee, that's a tough one. Yeah,
to you, Pat.
I mean, well, that's a sort of tough one. I mean, if you jump on the law school conveyor belt, there are well established processes where law firms and government agencies and nonprofit organizations come to the schools and you sign up to interview with them. And so that doesn't take an enormous amount of energy or initiative or imagination on your part if you are part of the law school sort of thing. I mean, as those of us who are lawyers and have been at firms know, the way we hire young people to come to the law firm is through the summer program, where we hire people to be summer associates, and they get a sense of what the practice of law is like at our particular firm. We get a sense of them, and at the end of the summer, we mostly give them offers. And if they want to come back, they come back, and make an obscene amount of money, even though, you know, they're baby lawyers who don't know anything. So that's easy. The more difficult thing is if you don't want to go to law school right away. Well, I mean, let's talk about some of the numbers for a minute, because I really do like the idea of you not jumping on the law school, even though a lot of you raised your hands, sort of conveyor belt immediately. But if you do it and you get a job at a firm like mine, you make $160,000 a year your first year at the firm. The first job, the amount of money, because this is all confessional now, the first job I had out of Yale Law School in 1977, I made $13,500. 15 years out of law school, I was making $65,000. I always resisted the notion of getting a job as a means to an end. I wanted to work at something that was intrinsically connected to me. And mostly that was public service and teaching. And those are, you know, unless you have an exalted position on the UCLA political science faculty, those are not very well-paying jobs. Eventually, you'll get to a point where you have six-figure private school tuitions to pay for your kids and a mortgage and that sort of thing. That's the point at which you have an instrumental connection to the world of work. Then you make the compromise, you make the Faustian bargain, and you get a job which is a means to the end of supporting your family. But while you're young, you know, I mean, when I got out of Yale Law School, the world was my oyster. And as I say, I took a job for $13,000 because I thought it was a fantastic job. And you can manage. You can manage if you are, if you're not totally risk averse, and if you can figure it out, and you can manage. So anyway, I'd be happy to talk to any of you during the break about your particular circumstances. I remember I was on a panel similar to this a year ago, and I don't know if any of you were here, but there was some kid during the question and answer thing who said, I'm in this terrible dilemma. I don't know whether I've been accepted at Pepperdine and at Southwestern, I think. I don't know what should I do, you know, and I had to use all of my restraint not to take a coin out of my pocket, and I mean, you know, those are the things that people agonize about, you know, but and I'd be happy to talk to any of you about your personal, you know, plans and that sort of thing during the break. But my overall advice is to be is not to be intimidated by all of the negative information that you get about how hard it is out there, the difficulty of the market, and that sort of thing. You know, you're bright and energetic, and you should be daring in your choices.
So, what a difference timing makes. So when I graduated from law school, now I had that summer associate job. The summer associate firm I worked for, at the end of the summer, I got an offer, and 6 weeks later, the firm was no longer there. Okay, so this is in 1992. So there went my $160,000 a year, although it was $80,000.
We can also talk about the economics of law firms, which are much more fragile than people
Which is how I became
understand.
interested in economics too, because you're like, how does this place work? How do people get paid? So I had the job, and then boom, it was gone. And because I went to UC Hastings and I did not go to Yale, I did not, that career office at UC Hastings, by the way, I hope it's changed, they are not very helpful. And it's a blessing and a curse, though. I mean, one thing that you get by going to UCLA is that, have you ever argued with anybody at Murphy Hall? Have you ever had any problems getting your classes? Those are serious life skills that you don't recognize now, but those will help you, okay? They really will. I mean, I think it's absolutely true.
Right.
I got that class that I was not supposed to get, and, you know, I knew I could argue with someone and win. I knew that if somebody gave me no for an answer and it wasn't going to work for me, I had to challenge it. And so you do get this sort of resilience by going to a UC school that's really helpful. So at Hastings, you know, I had all those UCLA skills, and honestly, the career department didn't help at all. So I'd also say that literally almost every single job I've ever gotten in my life, there is a personal connection there. It's not about just sending your resume out. And you'll hear the funny story about how I got my job graduating from law school. So one of my friends, I went to Loyola Law School for 1 year, and I transferred to Hastings because I was paying for it myself, and Loyola was too expensive. And I started calculating those student loans, and I figured out I better get a transfer application and get back to a UC school, so I'm not gonna have mountains of debt when I graduate. One friend that I made my first year at Loyola Law School, her Armenian grandmother lived in Bermuda Dunes with the Armenian mother of a judge, a district court judge in Los Angeles. Okay, that's the connection. I mean, that's a pretty light connection. She had an externship. She said, I have this friend who needs a job. I got the externship. That led to me getting a clerkship 2 years out of law school. And then he helped me get a job with another judge. So I scrambled around and got 2 clerkships. Now, clerkships are considered to be extremely prestigious, but they don't pay very well. So suddenly my $80,000 a year paycheck got cut to $60,000 over 2 years. And that's an example of you take the opportunity, you don't worry about the money. I could have gotten a job at some other firm for some amount of money, but I knew that I needed to have that blue chip resume that you need as a lawyer, because as a lawyer, you don't have anything at the beginning but your grades and whatever you put on your resume. And so for me, definitely you take the pay cut. Again, I went back to my parents' house.
You can always put on your resume that you were a black belt.
But I'm not a black belt, though. I'm not a black belt.
Character.
So I had to go live at my parents' house because for $30,000 a year on the student, I lived at my parents' house for 2 years, and I took the train to downtown LA. And then when I was done, that judge, who was so instrumental in my life, helped me get my next job at Jones Day, because then I had some experience. And so my friend from first year of law school helps me get my externship, which then helps me get my job, which then helps me get my other job, which then helps me get the law firm job. And meanwhile, those 2 gentlemen that were judges, they gave me a lifetime of career advice that is just priceless. And in terms of doing meaningful work in your life, that had a huge impact on me, because I'm constantly paying it back. I mean, when somebody does favors like that for you, you want to turn around and do the same favor. And I urge you to do that in your life, because when you're helping other people, people help you, and it's this little informal network that you develop. And even when I worked at Jones Day, I mean, I switched to investment banking because I was working really hard in a deal with the investment bankers, and the guy said, you know what, you would be a great investment banker, what do you think? And I said, hallelujah, let's get over to finance. Working on the same sort of bankrupt deals. And again, now I have to tell this part of my story because it's so important. My husband, I met at Stratton's, which is now Madison's, in Westwood in 1988, and we are still married. And he graduated from UCLA, went to UCLA Business School, and we sort of been together, and we helped each other get jobs. Okay, he worked at Ernst & Young. He helped me get my job working in the in-house legal department of Ernst & Young for my first summer. I helped him because my mom knew somebody that she sold a house to. I helped him get his job, his first job in investment management. And so we've been kind of scaffolding off each other. He meets people, I meet people. So make sure you have time for friends and family in your life, because that is your social connection. And believe it or not, those small connections will help you get jobs.
They understand. They're on Facebook 4 hours a day. They understand about networking.
Well, and this is, I have to tell you about this book because I don't know the author. I just happen to have read it. And I have to tell you, it has really good advice in it. It's called The Defining Decade. It's about your 20s. Have you seen this?
No.
It's really good. It talks about relationships. It talks about your network of friends. It has really good advice. So I actually will give this book to somebody. But the deal is that you have to give it to somebody else that you don't know, and you have to chat with them for 5 minutes and make sure you create your connection to people at UCLA. I did not take the time to do that, and I regret that. That was something I realized the importance of as I got to be older. So I probably have 2 or 3 friends from undergrad at UCLA, and that's a shame because I should have more. So when we're done, somebody who wants to read it can get this book for me. It has great advice. A lot of the same stuff that everybody up here is saying, by the way.
Or you can read.
Oh, we got another one.
Look, this is my book.
No, I
I just ordered that from Amazon.
Did you? Yeah. This is the funny thing too. This actually reminds me a lot of life, because if you see all of these stickers and stuff sticking out of it. So this came out last year in hardback, and it's coming out in paperback. And this represents all of the editing that I did after it was in hardback when it was going into paperback, which also shows you that how nothing is ever finished. Even something that looks like, no, it's a finished project, right? I mean, like, I write it, they publish it, it's between actual hard covers with a print, and then somebody says, well, do you want to change? Absolutely, I'll change almost everything in there if you give me an opportunity to. I would keep changing it. But she had great advice. Pay attention to people. I have sort of a weird, I'm going to have two things I'm going to say, and you're going to have to help me remember what the two were. But one is pay attention to people. The other thing I wanted to say was about, maybe about not getting seduced by the numbers. Because, I have to say, Pat said $160,000 a year, and I was ready to start law school like tomorrow. Sign me up, I'll take it. But then on the other hand, I look back and I say, among the things that I've done.
You have to build 2,000 client hours a year to be eligible.
Well, then which will be my other point. So it's a weird thing. I can't, you can't, of all of the people that I know who went to law school, for example, I can't overlook the fact that, and I don't know if I should I don't mean to make a lot of this, but every male I know who went to law school is still practicing. And 80% of the women I know who went to law school are not practicing any longer. And in part that was because of families. It's probably another one of those things that is like just, not even something on your mind now, and it shouldn't be on your mind now. But ultimately, like I said about getting a life is hard, getting a job is easy. I mean, these things are also out there and coming in the future, and balancing is tough. On the number side of things, a few years back when I did Food Network, and I was the winner of Food Network Star. I had a show on Food Network called The Gourmet Next Door, which is just sort of, I had Giada De Laurentiis mentoring me, and Bobby Flay telling me what a fantastic cook and stuff I was, and them then calling up and wanting to pick up the season, and it's a seductive package in front of you to be like, holy mackerel, okay, this is how this is going to work. So I'll have a cooking line, and I'm going to have this show, and I'll open up the restaurant I've always wanted to open up, and I'll write cookbooks, and ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. And then I also had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at home, and a husband who started looking at that situation and being like, how's that going to work? So we're never going to see you. You're going to be traveling all the time. Is this going to work out for us? And, each person's story is different and unique. But what I am just saying in there is that when you think about, life is full of these moments where somebody, carrot and stick, right? So somebody dangles that delicious carrot out in front of you, and you really have to sort of make some critical decisions sometimes about, how do you really want that carrot? Like, is it the right carrot? Because there's a lot of, everything, there's a yin and a yang to everything. And $160,000 a year to me still sounds fantastic. I would love to make $160,000 a year. But, on the flip side of it, all of those fathers that I know who are lawyers, I'm just going to say it. I don't think a lot of them see their kids. I don't think a lot of them see their wives. I've seen a lot of divorces. So it's all of that stuff is out there too, and eventually these will be things to think about, which is more just again about saying that, about racing forward and stuff on the path. Don't necessarily get too committed to that idea too that you've got to get it all figured out, because life is going to change in so many ways that will impact everything else that you think is so certain about what you want for your future now. So being able to sort of be dynamically flexible and accommodating and make, quick changes and be nimble and never ever feel that there would be some shame in giving up something, just because you had been intended to go, in this particular direction. I still remember, graduating from UCLA and having that horrible, suffocating first job. And the biggest part of why I didn't quit for the first few months was because I felt ashamed if I quit. It was like publicly admitting that I had made a bad decision, or that I really was not actually cut out for this thing, or that I had billed myself as being totally excited about for such a long time. So there's lots of things and stuff that are going to come up in the future. But paying attention to people is always important. Everything that I've done, sort of, in the past, especially 10 years, has been because of some sort of random conversation with somebody where something sort of sparked and you decided, I should probably follow up on that, and then that leads to another conversation that then leads to, and then, and eventually you get so good at it. At the beginning of it, you really are that person who's like shoving your resume at people and being like, hire me. And then eventually you become much more subtle and skilled at sort of the art of sliding into conversation about how fantastic you are and how you happen to be looking for a job, and then people they start in conversations and in relationships, people start to open up and offer you things, but they don't tend to offer you things until you have a relationship. So pay attention to the relationship building. It's all important. None of these things are, it's not that none of them are casual, but just, instead of don't necessarily look at your relationships opportunistically, for what they're going to get, how you're going to get out of them later. But certainly, especially when you're graduating, take time to build relationships with your family and with your friends, and go to events where you meet old people and, they give you business cards and things. And you follow up with emails, or you friend them on Facebook, and then you just shamelessly ask for advice, or shamelessly ask for anything. And, that kind of sort of openness and honesty has always, I think, it tends to unlock a lot of doors, when you are willing to sort of just put your true self out in front of other people and invite them to just recognize that, even if you are still in the rough, that you are definitely becoming something fantastic, and maybe they want to be a part of helping mold what that next step is going to be.
Just to follow up on the last point you were making, look, Jeff got 5 busy people to sit up here with the seductive thing. Well, they're just going to ask for your advice. So obviously, there is something about being asked your advice that is complimentary to us, that we're willing to sit up here and spend an afternoon with you. And so if you go to one of your parents' friends who's in business or is in a field that you're interested in, and you ask them, how did you get into that field? What interested you? What path did you take? They're going to be very pleased to answer your questions and give you some really first-hand advice on their area. And so that's really good idea. I mean, we're talking about tactics. All of this has been about what we now call, and what you folks are all expert at, is networking. Mm-hmm. It's not something that when I was in school even came up at any one place or time, but it's what we all do on a daily basis. It's how we get business. We go out to lunch with people. We set up our networks. People don't send you business because you go out to lunch with them, but they do send you business after you establish a relationship with them. And it can't be, okay, we've been out one time, so you're going to send me a client today? That isn't how it works at all. It may be a year, it may be 2 years, it may be 3 years down the road, which is why you have credibility already with your parents' friends or with your cousins or somebody else who's already in business. So if you want to get a position in any particular business, it's nice to have an in. I mean, there's basically only 2 reasons people hire you. They know that you're really, really good at what they want you to do, or you're a friend of somebody who can vouch for you and that they trust. That's how things are done. My first law clerk job was because my best friend at the law school a year ahead of me had that law clerk job for a small firm in Marina del Rey the summer before. It was really hard for first-year law students to get an official legal job. That's how I got that job. My wife's first job clerking for the Los Angeles Times was because she got elected Secretary-Treasurer of Moot Court at the law school, and the predecessor for her said, hey, are you still looking for a job? She said, yeah. I think the Times is looking for somebody. I was there last summer. Do you want me to put in a word for you? Yes. She worked 25 years for the Los Angeles Times, and now she works for NBC. So we met in a tax class. I was a 3rd year, and I was taking a pass, not pass, so the only thing I wanted to do was flirt with
That's networking.
That's networking of a different kind, and it's worked out very well. So, that's right. But the other advice you had about building a life at the same time, it is a challenge. I mean, whatever field you go into, whether it's running a restaurant, which I think makes actually working in a law office sound easy. I mean, the hours that somebody like that puts in is enormous. I think your goal should be eventually to have control over your life by doing what I do.
Yep.
I employ myself.
Yeah, be self-employed.
It's not something you have the option to do right out. I don't suggest that for anybody after they graduate from law school hanging up their shingle and expecting for the world to barge in on them. Yes, go to work for the best and finest firm you can go to help pay off your bills and learn your craft, or in whatever business you're going into. Learn your craft because you don't know it getting out of school. Academia is wonderful, but it teaches you a way to think, not about the practicalities of whatever you're going to be doing. But then, when you get a chance, if you do really good work, who are your clients? It's the partners in the firm, but your other clients are the actual people that you work with. And you'll be working with people at your level inside those companies. They'll be promoted over the years, and they'll remember you did really, really good work. So do your best as you go. Good work gets rewarded just like creating its own network. And you have all the electronics that we never had for doing that. It's so much easier and quicker today.
Totally. I would say be resourceful. I had no contacts in the beginning. I'm just completely coming from a different realm entirely. So if we were just going to get practical, because that's what you asked.
But you're an entrepreneur who's had to market yourself.
That's right.
And these students in some ways want to market themselves to the world of work.
Exactly, which is exactly what I was about to say, which is exactly what you're pointing to, which is be resourceful. So if we were going to look at steps, which I think we all agree on, look at your resume and take a moment to actually download who are you, what are your experiences, what have you done to date, and be willing to actually maybe even create something on there that isn't just ordinary. My 11-year-old, we were writing a bio. They asked to write a bio for this thing she's involved in. She's in the gifted program, and they said we want a bio, and I thought that was really kind of fun. So we started writing her bio, and it really was who she was as a person, a little bit about her spirit, some of her accomplishments. So practically, the resume itself. Then I would look at, and I kind of done this with people who are entrepreneurs as we're building our businesses, I would look at different categories. I would look at who do you know, meaning what I call that is, friends of friends, okay? So that would be, I call that a warm lead. So I'd create a list of warm leads. That would be friends, people that you know, that would be warm, right? Then I would call them centers of influence. Anyone that you can get to, maybe a friend of a friend, who's an influential person that out of a conversation would be willing to help you. And most people, like you said, so many people have helped all of us, and that's why we wouldn't even hesitate to help someone, although you may not think so, right? It's a matter of the request. So the second would be centers of influence. If there's anyone you know who's a centers of influence, which you could actually make a call to. I would do a third list, and I would call it your wish list. And I would actually let yourself dream about what are the companies that you wish, if you could have anything you wanted, you wish that you would actually work for those people, right? And then I would actually begin playing with how would you approach some of these people and what would that look like? Whether it is, listen, I'm very unconventional, and this is the truth because I help people build their businesses. Some is friends and relationships, and sometimes it's an authentic note or letter or message. Like, listen, I've been watching you. I don't even know you. I appreciate your firm. I appreciate what you're up to. Would you be willing to give me a few moments? It sounds like a cold call, but you could be surprised of what could come out of that kind of willingness to be that authentic. Mm-hmm. It's unconventional, right? In my first business, I'll just give you this very simple, and all of us have our own businesses. In a sense, you're always building your businesses. In my first business that I started when I was 23, I remember seeing this man who was a CEO in the news all the time. And for 1 week, literally, I don't know why, but across my desk, like his articles through different publications, about what he was up to. 7 different publications. I kept reading about him. I'm like, what is this? You know when something kind of possesses you? And I was like, all right, let me take the sign. So I knew where he was. I knew his company. And I wrote him a letter. I'm like, listen, I don't know you and your wife, but I've been watching this and this. I so appreciate the depth of service that you're doing on behalf of your companies. And we may never connect, but I just wanted you to know I've read about you 7 times this week. I don't even know why. I mean, it sounds like such a crazy thing, right? So I send it, and I hand deliver it. I put together, seriously, some hand-delivered flowers that I made myself. I hand deliver it to his office, to him and his wife. His wife calls me 2 hours later and says, did you know it was my birthday? And I was like, no, Mrs. Questrom, I really didn't know. And she said, these are the most beautiful flowers I got. Can I come see you tomorrow? And I was in such shock. And literally out of that whole experience, she came to visit me. We met. We ended up doing business together. At the end of like a 2-hour meeting, she said to me, what are you doing this Saturday? I'm like, I don't know. What do you want me to do? And so she invited me to his home, their home. And this is a man, I can say this publicly, his name is Alan Questrom. He was the CEO of Macy's. He's the man that turned around Federated. He ended up turning around Barney's. He ended up turning around JCPenney, and was the most grounded, generous person. Invited me to this dinner party, 24 other people, and basically said, listen, there's so many people that have helped me in my life. All of you should know each other. And however you're going to help each other, you should. And that's how I met the heads of Chanel and ended up, blah, blah, blah. But my point is the willingness to really reach out authentically if something inspires you. So yes, absolutely relationships, but relationships also get caused out of being authentic.
I think that's true. So the networking thing, when I remember being in DC and everybody kept saying, you got to network, you got to network. And I'm like, you go to the party, you're like, I'm supposed to network. It's like this big thing I'm supposed to do.
Here's my card.
But it's almost, I was a very shy person. And so that like almost paralyzed me with fear that I was supposed to do this networking thing. And as an adult, it's more, now that it's showing a genuine interest in what other people do. If you're an intellectually curious person and you want to know what they do, that really is networking. But it's if you go to a dinner or you go to a party, it's taking that 2 seconds to sit next to the person you don't know instead of sitting next to the person that you do know. I still make myself do that. I make myself sit next to the person I don't know and try and figure out what they do. It's being interested in people. And once I took the networking word off of it, I'm like, oh, I do that all the time. And that's what I like to do. So
I invite a lot of people out for coffee.
Yeah.
And then you sit and you just talk. And you never know. Yeah. And
Just, it's chatting people up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, how oftentimes the biggest opportunities that one has, one never expects or wasn't necessarily looking for at the moment.
That's
and
the serendipity thing.
yeah,
too.
it's an amazing
Yeah.
and really a beautiful thing that and this idea of doing really good work, even when you don't think anybody's watching, even when you can't imagine that anything good would come of it. People are watching. In my business, when we're not teaching, we go around, present our research at other universities. And I remember I once said to a professor who was a mentor of mine, I said, are you going to give a job talk, a talk that you would give to get a job? Because that was always a concern that the faculty member you're working with might leave for another university. And I said, are you doing that? And he said, every job is a job. Every talk is a job talk. And that's, I think that's really right. Let's end on that note and go outside and have a drink and continue the conversation. Thanks everybody for being here. And thank you so much for our panel.